The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as Sarah Chin adjusted her rifle scope for the 100th time that week. The other recruits had given up trying to match her precision days ago, but Sarah never stopped pushing herself. Each shot had to be perfect. Each breath had to be controlled. Each heartbeat had to be steady. "Chen, you're up," barked Instructor Rodriguez, his weathered face showing no emotion as he pointed toward the 1,000-yard range. The wind was picking up, making the shot more challenging than usual. Perfect. Sarah settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The target seemed impossibly small through her scope, but she had learned to see beyond what others thought was possible. Growing up in a small farming town in Iowa, she had spent countless hours hunting with her grandfather, learning that patience and precision mattered more than raw strength. "Take your time, Chen," Rodriguez called out, though they both knew she never rushed a shot. The other recruits watched in silence. Most of them had initially dismissed her when she first arrived at SEAL training. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 130 pounds, Sarah looked nothing like the typical candidate. They assumed she would wash out in the first week like so many others. They were wrong. Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered that familiar zone of complete focus. The world around her faded away until nothing existed except her, the rifle, and the target. She squeezed the trigger with gentle, steady pressure. The shot echoed across the training ground. Through the scope, she watched as the bullet found its mark dead center. Another perfect shot. "Outstanding," Rodriguez muttered, though he tried to hide his impressed tone. He had been training snipers for 15 years and had never seen anyone with Sarah's natural ability combined with her relentless work ethic. But Sarah was already thinking about the next shot, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove herself. She had joined the Navy with a simple goal: become the best sniper the SEALs had ever seen. Everyone told her it was impossible. Women weren't allowed in combat roles, they said. The physical demands were too great, they claimed. She was too small, too young, too different. Sarah had heard it all before. Growing up, she was always the smallest kid in her class, the one teachers worried about, the one other kids thought they could push around. But her grandfather had taught her that size didn't determine strength, and her grandmother had shown her that quiet determination could overcome any obstacle. "Remember, little sparrow," her grandfather used to say, "the most dangerous predator in the forest isn't always the biggest. Sometimes it's the one nobody sees coming." After training that day, Sarah sat alone in the barracks, cleaning her rifle with the same meticulous care her grandfather had taught her. Her bunkmate, Jackson, dropped onto his cot with a heavy sigh. "I don't get it, Chen," he said, shaking his head. "How do you make it look so easy? I've been shooting since I was 8 years old, and I can't touch your accuracy." Sarah looked up from her rifle, considering her answer carefully. She had learned that most people didn't really want to hear about the hours of practice, the mental discipline required, or the countless sacrifices that went into achieving excellence. "It's not about the shooting," she finally said. "It's about understanding yourself. When you know exactly who you are and what you're capable of, everything else becomes clearer." Jackson frowned. "What do you mean?" "Most people fight against their limitations," Sarah explained, running the cleaning rod through the barrel with practiced motions. "I accept mine and find ways to use them. I'm not the strongest person here, so I focus on being the most precise. I'm not the fastest, so I make sure I'm the most patient. Every weakness can become a strength if you approach it the right way." The conversation was interrupted by Instructor Rodriguez entering the barracks. His presence immediately commanded attention from all the recruits. "Chen, you're with me," he said curtly. "Command wants to see you." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Being called to see command could mean anything from recognition to dismissal. She had seen talented recruits disappear overnight for reasons that were never fully explained. The walk to the command building felt longer than usual. Rodriguez remained silent, his expression unreadable. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, analyzing every recent interaction, every training session, every evaluation. "Don't overthink it," Rodriguez finally said as they approached the building. "You've done nothing wrong." The command office was Spartan and intimidating, with awards and commendations covering one wall and operational maps covering another. Behind the desk sat Commander Morrison, a legendary figure among Navy SEALs whose reputation preceded him into every room. Petty Officer Chen, Morrison said, gesturing for her to take a seat. I've been reviewing your training records. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart was racing. Thank you, sir. Morrison leaned forward, studying her with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. What do you hope to accomplish here? The question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected inquiries about her training, her background, her techniques. This was something different, something more personal. I want to serve my country to the best of my abilities, sir, she replied. Morrison shook his head. That's the answer you think I want to hear. I asked what you hope to accomplish. Sarah took a deep breath, weighing her words carefully. In this moment, she realized that honesty might be more valuable than diplomacy. I want to prove that excellence isn't determined by what people expect from you, she said. I want to show that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. And I want to protect people who can't protect themselves. A slight smile crossed Morrison's face. Better. Much better. Tell me about your grandfather. The sudden shift in topic surprised Sarah, but she sensed this was important. He taught me to hunt, sir. But, more than that, he taught me to think like my prey, to understand the environment, to be patient. He served in Vietnam as a sniper. I know, Morrison said quietly. Staff Sergeant Chen was legendary in his own right. He saved my unit's lives in 1968 near Da Nang. I was a young lieutenant then, barely older than you are now. Sarah's eyes widened. Her grandfather had rarely spoken about his service, and she had no idea his actions had such far-reaching impact. Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Your grandfather never spoke about what happened that day, did he? No, sir. He preferred to talk about hunting rabbits and the importance of respecting your weapon. Sounds like him, Morrison chuckled. We were pinned down by enemy fire for 6 hours. 3 separate sniper teams had us trapped, and we couldn't move without losing men. Your grandfather volunteered for a suicide mission, crawling through enemy territory to eliminate the threats. Sarah remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. He took out all 3 sniper teams in under an hour, Morrison continued. Never missed a shot. Saved 14 lives that day, including mine. But what impressed me most wasn't his shooting. It was his complete calm under pressure. No fear, no hesitation, just absolute focus on the mission. Morrison turned back to face Sarah. I see that same quality in you. That's why I'm recommending you for advanced sniper training. It's an accelerated program that will push you beyond anything you've experienced so far. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. I'm honored by the opportunity, sir. Don't be honored yet, Morrison warned. This program has a 90% failure rate. The physical demands are extreme, the mental pressure is enormous, and the training scenarios are designed to break even the most determined candidates. Are you certain you're ready for that level of challenge? Sarah thought about her grandfather, about the quiet strength he had shown throughout his life, about the lessons he had taught her in the woods behind their farm. She thought about every person who had told her she wasn't strong enough, wasn't big enough, wasn't right for this path. Yes, sir, she said without hesitation. I'm ready. Morrison nodded slowly. Good. You'll start Monday. But, understand this, from the moment you enter that program, you'll be held to the highest possible standard. There will be no allowances made for your size, your gender, or your background. You'll succeed or fail based purely on your performance. I wouldn't want it any other way, sir. As Sarah left the command building, her mind was already shifting into preparation mode. She knew the next phase of her training would test every aspect of her abilities, but she also knew she had been preparing for this challenge her entire life. That evening, she called her grandmother from the base payphone. The familiar voice brought an immediate sense of comfort and connection to home. Hello, Grandma. It's Sarah. My dear girl, how are you doing out there in California? Sarah looked out at the ocean, visible from where she stood. The waves were calm tonight, reflecting the setting sun like a mirror. I'm doing well. Really well. I wanted you to know that everything you and Grandpa taught me is making a difference. He would be so proud of you, her grandmother said softly. We both are. You're following your own path, just like he always said you would. Grandma, did you know about what happened in Vietnam? About Grandpa saving other soldiers? There was a long pause before her grandmother answered. He told me some things, over the years. But, he always said the important part wasn't what he did in the war. The important part was what he learned about himself, and what he could teach others. That's why he spent so much time with you in those woods, Sarah. He saw something special in you. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I wish he could see what I'm doing now. Oh, sweetheart, her grandmother said with warmth in her voice. He can see. And, he knows you're going to do things that will amaze everyone, including yourself. After hanging up, Sarah returned to the barracks to find Jackson and several other recruits gathered around her bunk. They had clearly been talking about her summons to command. So? Jackson asked. Are you in trouble or getting promoted? Sarah sat on her bunk and began preparing her gear for the next day's training. Neither. I'm moving to a different program. Advanced training? Asked Williams, one of the more experienced recruits. Sarah nodded. Advanced sniper training. The group fell silent. Everyone knew about the advanced program's reputation. Most recruits who attempted it never returned to regular training. They either succeeded and disappeared into specialized units, or they washed out entirely. When do you start? Jackson asked quietly. Monday. Williams whistled low. That's fast. They must really believe in your potential. Sarah looked around at the faces of her fellow recruits. These men had become her family over the past months, supporting her through the most challenging training of her life. She would miss them, but she knew this was the right path. I want you all to know, she said carefully, that training with you has made me better. You've pushed me to improve every day, and you've treated me as an equal when others might not have. I won't forget that. Jackson grinned. Just promise us something, Jen. When you're out there being the best sniper in the Navy, remember us regular grunts. Always, Sarah replied. But, you won't be regular grunts for long. Everyone in this room has what it takes to excel. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As the evening wore on and the other recruits gradually settled in for the night, Sarah remained awake, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. She thought about her grandfather's words, about quiet strength and patient determination. She thought about Commander Morrison's challenge and the opportunity to prove herself at the highest level. Most of all, she thought about the moment when her skills would be tested in real combat, when lives would depend on her ability to remain calm under pressure and make impossible shots seem routine. She didn't know when that moment would come, but she knew it was approaching. Everything in her life had been preparing her for that test. Outside, the California night was peaceful, but Saracen was already mentally preparing for war. 6 months later, Sarah found herself lying motionless in the Afghan desert, her ghillie suit blending perfectly with the rocky terrain. The temperature had dropped to near freezing during the night, but she hadn't moved from her position in over 8 hours. Through her scope, she watched the compound where intelligence suggested a high-value target was planning an attack on a nearby village. The advanced sniper training had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. Sleep deprivation, extreme weather conditions, impossible shooting scenarios, and constant psychological pressure had eliminated most of her fellow candidates within the first month. But Sarah had endured, driven by the memory of her grandfather's quiet strength and her own determination to prove that excellence came from within. Falcon, this is Overwatch, came the quiet voice of her spotter, Sergeant Martinez, through her earpiece. Movement in the compound. Second floor window, northwest corner. Sarah adjusted her scope minutely, bringing the target area into perfect focus. She could see figures moving inside the building, but the angle and distance made positive identification impossible. Negative on positive ID, she whispered back. Need better visual confirmation. The mission was complicated by the presence of civilians in the area. Intelligence suggested the target compound was being used to plan an attack on a school in the nearby village, but collateral damage had to be avoided at all costs. One wrong shot could kill innocent people and turn the local population against coalition forces. Falcon, command is getting antsy, Martinez said. They want confirmation or extraction. Sarah understood the pressure. The operation had been planned for weeks, and multiple units were positioned throughout the region waiting for her assessment. But her training had taught her that patience was often the difference between mission success and catastrophe. "Tell command we hold position," she replied. "Target will show himself." They always do. Martinez had initially been skeptical when he was assigned to work with Sarah. The veteran sergeant had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan and had worked with dozens of snipers. When he learned his new partner was a woman fresh from advanced training, he had prepared for the worst. Those doubts had evaporated during their first mission together. Sarah's combination of technical skill and tactical intelligence had impressed him within hours. More importantly, her complete calm under pressure reminded him of the best snipers he had known. "Movement again," Martinez reported. "Main entrance. 3 figures approaching from the east." Through her scope, Sarah watched as 3 men approached the compound. Even at 800 yards, she could see they were armed and moving with military precision. But something felt wrong about the situation. "Overwatch, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" she asked quietly. Martinez studied the approaching figures through his binoculars. "They don't look like locals. Movement is too disciplined. Could be foreign fighters." Sarah tracked the figures as they entered the compound, but her attention was drawn to movement in the village beyond. Through her scope, she could see families beginning their morning routines, children playing in the streets, elderly men gathering to drink tea and discuss the day ahead. "Overwatch, I need you to check something. Village activity patterns. Are they normal for this time of day?" Martinez shifted his position to get a better view of the village. After several minutes of observation, he understood Sarah's concern. "Negative, Falcon. Too much activity for this early. And I'm seeing defensive positions being taken around the school." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. If the villagers were taking defensive positions, it meant they knew something was coming. Either the planned attack was imminent, or coalition forces had been compromised. "Command, this is Falcon," she said into her radio. "Request immediate intelligence update. Village behavior suggests possible compromise of mission security." The response came back quickly. "Falcon, intelligence confirms attack plan for this morning. School is primary target. You are cleared to engage on positive identification." Sarah adjusted her position slightly, ensuring she had the best possible angles on both the compound and the approaches to the village. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar coat. In the next few hours, her decisions would determine whether children lived or died. "Contact," Martinez reported urgently. "Multiple armed figures moving toward the village from the north. Count is 6, possibly 7. Through her scope, Sarah could see the approaching threat. The figures were dressed as civilians but carried weapons and moved with obvious military training. They were using a dry creek bed for concealment, approaching the village from the one direction not covered by the defensive positions the villagers had established. "Command, this is Falcon. Enemy force approaching village from the north. 7 confirmed hostiles with automatic weapons. Request permission to engage. Falcon, you are cleared to engage. Protect the village." Sarah felt the familiar calm settle over her as she shifted into combat mode. Her breathing became controlled and steady. Her heart rate slowed. The world narrowed to the view through her scope and the targets threatening innocent lives. The lead figure was moving faster than the others, clearly the squad leader. Sarah tracked him through her scope, calculating wind speed, distance, and bullet drop. At nearly 900 yards, the shot would be challenging even under ideal conditions. She squeezed the trigger with gentle, steady pressure. The bullet traveled for just over a second before finding its target. The squad leader dropped instantly, but the other figures immediately took cover and began scanning for the source of the shot. "Target down," Sarah reported calmly. 6 hostiles remaining, taking defensive positions. What followed was a deadly game of patience and precision. The remaining attackers knew a sniper was in the area, but they couldn't pinpoint her location. They had 2 choices: retreat or continue their advance toward the village. They chose to advance. "Falcon, they're splitting up," Martinez reported. 3 moving along the creek bed, 3 taking the high ground to the east. Sarah had to make a tactical decision. She could eliminate the immediate threat to the village, but the group taking the high ground would eventually find a position that might compromise her location. If they had radio communication with the compound, her mission could be exposed. Taking the high ground group first, she decided. They're the bigger threat to mission security. The three figures moving east were using natural cover effectively, but Sarah had spent months learning to see what others missed. She tracked the lead figure through her scope, waiting for the moment when he would have to expose himself to reach the next covered position. The shot came at nearly 1,000 yards, the bullet arcing through the thin mountain air to find its target. The second hostile dropped, and the remaining two immediately went to ground. 2 down, 5 remaining, Sarah reported. But they're getting smart about cover. Martinez was tracking the group in the creek bed through his binoculars. Creek bed group is still advancing. They'll reach the village perimeter in 10 minutes if they maintain current pace. Sarah knew she had to eliminate the immediate threat to the villagers, even if it meant exposing her position to the remaining hostiles on the high ground. Sometimes mission priorities required accepting tactical risks. She shifted her aim to the creek bed, tracking the leading figure through her scope. The range was shorter, but the target was moving faster and using better cover. She would have to time her shot perfectly. The hostile paused behind a boulder, probably receiving orders through radio communication. For just a moment, his upper torso was exposed. Sarah took the shot. The third hostile went down, and the remaining two in the creek bed finally understood they were facing a sniper of exceptional skill. They began retreating, using cover and concealment techniques that suggested professional military training. Creek bed hostiles are withdrawing, Martinez reported. But the two on the high ground are still maneuvering toward our position. Sarah studied the terrain through her scope, analyzing possible routes the remaining hostiles might use. Her training had taught her to think like the enemy, to anticipate their movements before they made them. They'll try to flank us from the south, she predicted. There's a ridge line that gives them concealment for most of the approach. Martinez adjusted his position to cover the southern approach while Sarah maintained overwatch on the compound and village. The remaining hostiles were now the hunted instead of the hunters, but they were still dangerous. 20 minutes passed in tense silence. Then, Martinez spotted movement. Contact south. 2 hostiles, 400 yards and closing. They're good using terrain features expertly. Sarah had to make another difficult decision. She could engage the flanking hostiles, but it would require her to shift position and potentially lose her overwatch of the compound and village. If there were additional threats she hadn't identified, innocent people could die. Overwatch, can you handle the flanking maneuver? She asked Martinez. The sergeant considered the tactical situation. He was an excellent soldier, but he wasn't a trained sniper. Engaging 2 professional fighters at 400 yards with a standard rifle would be challenging. I can try, he said quietly. But if I miss, they'll know exactly where we are. Sarah made her decision. Hold position. I'm taking the shot. She shifted her rifle toward the southern approach, leaving the compound temporarily unobserved. Through her scope, she found the 2 remaining hostiles moving along the ridgeline. They were maintaining good spacing and using cover effectively, but they had to cross one small clearing to reach their final position. Sarah waited with the patience her grandfather had taught her in the woods of Iowa. The first hostile reached the edge of the clearing and paused, scanning for threats. He couldn't see Sarah's position, but his training told him the crossing was dangerous. Finally, he made his move. Sarah tracked him through the clearing, led his movement slightly, and squeezed the trigger. The fourth hostile dropped at 700 yards. The final hostile immediately went to ground, now understanding he was facing a sniper of extraordinary ability. For several minutes, he remained motionless, probably hoping to blend with the terrain until darkness provided cover for escape. But Sarah had been trained to see what others couldn't. Through her scope, she spotted a slight irregularity in the shadows near a cluster of rocks. The hostile was well concealed, but his position was compromised by a small piece of equipment that reflected sunlight. 5th target located, she whispered to Martinez. Taking the shot. The final shot of the engagement traveled 800 yards to find its target. The threat to the village was eliminated. All hostiles down, Sarah reported to command. Village is secure. As the adrenaline of combat began to fade, Sarah found herself thinking about the men she had killed. They were enemy fighters threatening innocent lives, but they were still human beings with families and stories of their own. The weight of taking life, even in defense of others, was something no amount of training could completely prepare someone for.
Falcon, this is command. Outstanding work.
Intelligence suggests you prevented an attack that would have killed dozens of civilians.
Prepare for extraction. Martinez looked at Sarah with newfound respect.
I've worked with a lot of snipers, he said quietly.
But, I've never seen anything like that.
5 targets, ranges from 400 to 1,000 yards, all under combat pressure.
That was incredible.
Sarah was already breaking down her rifle for transport. It wasn't incredible, she replied.
It was necessary.
Those children in the village deserved to be protected. As they prepared for extraction, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that conversation with Commander Morrison. The advanced training had been everything he had promised: brutal, demanding, and transformative. But it had also given her the skills needed to save lives when it mattered most. The helicopter extraction arrived as scheduled, lifting them away from the barren landscape where Sarah had proven herself in combat for the first time. As they flew toward base, she looked down at the village below. Children were playing in the streets again, their families unaware of how close they had come to tragedy. That's why we do this, Martinez said, following her gaze.
For moments like that.
When people get to go home to their families because of decisions we made.
Sarah nodded, but her mind was already moving forward.
This mission was complete, but there would be others.
More threats to innocent lives.
More opportunities to use her skills in service of something greater than herself. She thought about her grandfather, about the quiet strength he had shown in his own war. She wondered if he had felt the same mixture of satisfaction and sorrow after protecting others through violence. She wished she could ask him about it, about how to carry the weight of necessary death without losing the humanity that made life worth protecting.
Back at base, Sarah underwent the standard post-mission debriefing. Intelligence officers wanted to know about enemy tactics, equipment, and behavior. Medical personnel checked for injuries and signs of combat stress.
Her superiors evaluated her performance and discussed future assignments. But the conversation that mattered most came that evening, when she called her grandmother from the base phone.
"Hello, sweetheart," her grandmother's familiar voice brought immediate comfort. "How are you doing?"
Sarah looked out at the desert landscape surrounding the base, thinking about how to answer that question honestly.
"I'm doing what I was trained to do, Grandma. Protecting people who need protection."
"That sounds like your grandfather talking," her grandmother said softly.
"Are you taking care of yourself while you're taking care of others?" Sarah smiled despite the emotional weight of the day.
Her grandmother had always been able to see through any facade to the truth underneath.
"I'm learning how to do both," Sarah admitted.
"It's harder than I expected, but it's important work. The most important work always is, dear. Just remember that taking care of others starts with taking care of yourself.
You can't pour from an empty cup."
After hanging up, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, cleaning her rifle and processing the events of the day. Each shot she had taken had been necessary, justified, and tactically sound. But each shot had also ended a life, and that reality demanded acknowledgement and respect. She thought about the children playing in the village, about families who would go to sleep safely because of actions they would never know about.
That was the purpose that gave meaning to everything else.
That was why she had endured the brutal training, why she had pushed herself beyond every limit, why she carried the weight of making life and death decisions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to innocent lives, new opportunities to prove that protection came from quiet strength rather than loud boasts.
Sarah Chen was ready for whatever came next.
2 years into her deployment, Sarah had earned a reputation that preceded her into every briefing room. Intelligence officers specifically requested her for high-value targets. Special operations commanders competed for her inclusion in their missions. Enemy communications intercepted by NSA analysts increasingly included warnings about the ghost sniper who never misses. But Sarah's most challenging mission came not from enemy forces, but from an unexpected source, her own command structure.
"Chen, you're being reassigned," announced Colonel Bradley, sliding a classified folder across his desk. "Effective immediately, you'll be working with a joint task force investigating allegations of war crimes."
Sarah felt her stomach drop.
War crimes investigations were career killers, regardless of the outcome.
Officers and enlisted personnel associated with such cases often found themselves blacklisted from future operations.
Sir, may I ask why I'm being selected for this assignment? Bradley leaned back in his chair, studying her with tired eyes.
Because you have a reputation for seeing things others miss, and because this investigation requires someone with unimpeachable integrity. Also, because the case involves sniper operations.
He opened the folder and turned it toward her.
Sarah saw photographs of a compound, tactical maps, and casualty reports. The images were disturbing civilian casualties in what should have been a precision military operation. 3 months ago, Special Operations Team Bravo conducted a raid on a suspected weapons cache, Bradley explained. Intelligence suggested the compound was being used to store explosives destined for attacks on coalition forces.
The operation went sideways. 12 civilians died, including 4 children.
Sarah studied the photographs, her trained eye analyzing the tactical situation. Something about the scene didn't match standard operating procedures for such missions.
What's the allegation, sir?
The team sniper, Staff Sergeant Morrison, is accused of deliberately targeting civilians. His spotter claims Morrison ignored orders and fired on non-combatants. Morrison maintains he was engaging legitimate targets who posed immediate threats to the assault team.
Sarah looked up sharply. Morrison? Any relation to Commander Morrison? Bradley nodded grimly. His son.
Which is why this investigation has to be absolutely thorough and completely impartial. There's political pressure from multiple directions, and the integrity of the entire special operations community is at stake.
Sarah understood the complexity immediately. If the younger Morrison was guilty, it would destroy his father's legendary reputation.
If he was innocent but convicted due to political pressure, it would send a chilling message to every sniper in the field that their split-second decisions would be second-guessed by people who had never faced such situations.
What exactly do you need me to do? I need you to reconstruct the operation, Bradley said.
Analyze every aspect of the sniper engagement. Review the tactical situation, examine the physical evidence, interview all personnel involved. Then, give me your professional assessment of whether the allegations have merit.
Sarah spent the next week immersing herself in the case files.
She studied satellite imagery, radio transcripts, after-action reports, and medical examiner findings. She interviewed members of the assault team, intelligence analysts, and command personnel. Most importantly, she spoke at length with both Morrison and his spotter.
Staff Sergeant David Morrison was nothing like his father.
Where the elder Morrison projected calm confidence, the younger man seemed constantly agitated. His answers were defensive, his explanations contradictory, and his attitude suggested someone hiding something important.
Look, Jen, Morrison said during their third interview, I know you have a reputation for being some kind of perfect sniper. But, you weren't there. You didn't see what I saw through that scope. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I'm not here to judge you, Morrison. I'm here to understand what happened. Walk me through your thought process during the engagement.
Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The assault team was taking heavy fire from multiple positions. My job was to provide overwatch and eliminate threats to the ground team.
That's exactly what I did. The medical examiner's report indicates several casualties were shot in the back, Sarah pointed out.
That's inconsistent with engaging threats to the assault team.
People were running everywhere, Morrison replied quickly.
In that kind of chaos, you can't always control the angle of engagement.
I took the shots I had. Sarah studied Morrison's file more carefully that evening.
His training scores were adequate but not exceptional. His previous combat deployments had been routine, with no significant incidents. But there were subtle patterns in his evaluations that suggested problems with judgment under pressure. The next day, she interviewed Morrison's spotter, Corporal Williams. The young soldier was clearly struggling with the weight of his accusations against his partner. I've never been in a situation like this before, Williams admitted. Morrison was my team leader.
I looked up to him. But what I saw that day.
Williams paused, gathering his courage to continue.
He wasn't engaging threats to the assault team, Williams said quietly.
The people he shot were running away from the fighting, not toward our guys. Some of them were obviously civilians, women, children, elderly men. I told him to check his targets, but he ignored me.
Sarah leaned forward. What exactly did you see through your spotting scope? The first shot was legitimate, Williams explained.
armed fighter on the roof, clearly targeting our team.
But, after that, Morrison seemed to lose it.
He started shooting at anyone who moved. When I questioned his target selection, he told me to shut up and do my job. The testimony was damning, but Sarah had learned to look beyond initial impressions.
She arranged to visit the actual compound where the incident had occurred. The site was a 3-hour helicopter flight into contested territory.
Sarah arrived with a security team and immediately began analyzing the tactical situation from the sniper's perspective. She set up her rifle in the exact position Morrison had occupied and studied the compound through her scope. What she saw changed everything.
From Morrison's position, the compound looked completely different than it did in the aerial photographs used during the investigation.
The angle of view, the shadows cast by surrounding buildings, and the layout of internal structures created optical illusions that could easily lead to misidentification of targets. Sarah spent hours examining every possible line of sight, every angle of observation. She used her laser rangefinder to measure distances and studied how lighting conditions during the operation would have affected target identification. "Ma'am," said Sergeant First Class Thompson, the team leader providing security for her investigation, "we need to move soon.
Intelligence suggests enemy patrols in this area." Sarah nodded but continued her analysis.
She had found something crucial, and she needed to document it thoroughly before leaving. Through her scope, she could see exactly what Morrison would have seen during the operation. The compound's internal courtyard was partially obscured by architectural features that created blind spots and visual confusion. More importantly, the shadows and lighting conditions during the early morning operation would have made positive target identification extremely difficult. But there was something else, something that Williams might not have been able to see from his position. Sarah moved to where the spotter would have been located and immediately understood the discrepancy in their testimonies. From Williams' position, the civilian nature of many targets would have been obvious. From Morrison's position, the same targets would have appeared threatening due to optical illusions created by the compound's architecture and lighting conditions. Sarah photographed every angle, documented every measurement, and recorded detailed observations about how environmental factors could have influenced the sniper's decision-making process. The evidence was complex, but a clearer picture was emerging. On the flight back to base, she reflected on what she had discovered. Morrison wasn't a war criminal deliberately targeting civilians. He was an inadequately trained sniper who had made tragic mistakes under extreme pressure. His spotter had been positioned too far away to understand the visual challenges Morrison faced, leading to the accusations of deliberate misconduct. The next week was spent writing her report. Sarah knew her findings would determine the outcome of Morrison's court-martial and potentially impact sniper training procedures throughout the military. Every word had to be precise, every conclusion supported by objective evidence. "Colonel Bradley," she said, entering his office with her completed report.
"I've finished my analysis."
Bradley looked up from his paperwork, clearly dreading what he was about to hear.
"Give it to me straight, Chen. Is Morrison guilty?"
Sarah chose her words carefully. Morrison made serious tactical errors that resulted in civilian casualties.
However, the evidence doesn't support charges of deliberate war crimes.
His mistakes were the result of inadequate training and poor tactical positioning, not malicious intent.
Bradley frowned. "Explain."
Sarah opened her report and pointed to the photographic evidence. The compound's architecture created visual distortions that made target identification extremely difficult from Morrison's position. His spotter was positioned too far away to provide effective guidance. Under those conditions, even experienced snipers might have made similar errors.
"So you're saying he's not responsible for those deaths?" "No, sir. He's absolutely responsible."
But responsibility and criminal intent are different things.
Morrison should never have been assigned as primary sniper for that mission.
His training records indicate he wasn't qualified for such a complex tactical environment.
Bradley studied the report for several minutes, absorbing the implications. "What are your recommendations?"
"Mandatory retraining for Morrison if he remains in sniper operations. Complete revision of sniper training protocols to include scenarios similar to what occurred at the compound. And establishment of stricter qualification standards for snipers assigned to urban operations." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in Commander Morrison's office, delivering the same briefing to the man whose son's career hung in the balance.
Thank you for your thoroughness, the elder Morrison said after reviewing her findings. I know this wasn't an easy investigation.
Sarah studied the commander's face, looking for signs of relief or disappointment. She found neither, only the same professional composure she remembered from their first meeting years ago.
Sir, if I may speak freely? Morrison nodded. Your son isn't a bad soldier, Sarah said. But, he was put in a situation that exceeded his capabilities. The real failure was in the command structure that approved his assignment to that mission. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. David has always struggled with living up to expectations, he finally said. Perhaps it's time he found a different path within the military. Sarah understood.
The younger Morrison would avoid court-martial, but his sniper career was over.
It was probably the best outcome for everyone involved.
2 weeks later, Sarah receives new orders. She was being reassigned to an elite counter-terrorism unit that specialized in hostage rescue operations. Her reputation for precision and judgment under pressure had reached the highest levels of military command. But, before leaving for her new assignment, she had one final conversation with Morrison's former spotter, Corporal Williams.
I wanted to thank you, Williams said.
I know it wasn't easy, but your investigation showed that people like Morrison and me aren't ready for the kind of operations you handle routinely.
Sarah shook her head.
It's not about being ready or not ready. It's about ensuring that people are properly trained and positioned for success. The system failed you both by putting you in an impossible situation.
Williams looked thoughtful. Do you think Morrison will be okay?
I think he'll find his place, Sarah replied. Not everyone is meant to be a sniper, just like not everyone is meant to be a pilot or a surgeon. The important thing is finding where your skills can be used most effectively. As she prepared for her new assignment, Sarah reflected on the lessons learned from the investigation. The precision required for her job went beyond simply hitting targets. It also meant understanding the broader implications of every decision, every shot, every moment of hesitation or action. She thought about her grandfather, about the weight he must have carried after his own combat experiences. She understood now why he had preferred to talk about hunting rabbits rather than the men he had killed in Vietnam. The real challenge wasn't learning to take life when necessary, it was learning to live with the consequences and ensure that such actions were always justified. Sarah's new mission would take her to urban environments around the world, where the stakes were even higher and the margin for error even smaller. She would be protecting hostages, eliminating terrorist threats, and making split-second decisions that could save or cost innocent lives. But she was ready. The investigation had taught her that precision meant more than accuracy.
It meant understanding context, accepting responsibility, and ensuring that every action served the greater good.
These lessons would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Martinez, her former spotter who was now stationed in Germany. Heard about your new assignment.
They're lucky to have you. Stay safe out there. Sarah smiled and typed back, always.
Take care of yourself. She finished packing her gear, double-checking every piece of equipment with the same meticulous care her grandfather had taught her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to prove that guardian angels sometimes carried rifles and wore camouflage. The weight of that responsibility no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like purpose. 5 years after joining the elite counter-terrorism unit, Sarah found herself crouched on a rooftop in Prague, watching a hostage situation unfold through her scope. Below, terrorists had taken control of an international school, threatening the lives of 43 children and 12 teachers from 15 different countries. Guardian Angel, this is command, came the voice through her earpiece.
Hostage taker has moved to the main classroom. You have a narrow window of opportunity.
Through her scope, Sarah could see the terrorist leader standing near the window of the second-floor classroom. Behind him, children sat huddled together, their faces showing the terror that no child should ever experience. The man held an assault rifle in one hand and a radio in the other, periodically gesturing wildly as he made demands to negotiators.
Roger, command. I have visual on primary target. Calculating shot parameters now.
The distance was 347 meters across the Prague skyline. Wind was minimal, but the target was partially obscured by window frames and constantly moving. Most challenging of all, the classroom was full of children who could be injured if the shot caused the terrorist to fall forward or trigger his weapon reflexively. Sarah had been tracking this terrorist cell for 6 months across 3 countries. They called themselves the New Dawn Liberation Front, but they were really just criminals who used political rhetoric to justify violence against innocent people.
Their leader, Alexander Petrov, had personally executed 17 hostages in previous operations.
Guardian Angel, negotiators have lost contact with primary target.
He's stopped responding to communication attempts.
You need to take the shot now. Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the zone of complete focus that had become second nature over years of operations. The world narrowed to the view through her scope, the terrorists' movements, and the calculation of the perfect moment to fire.
But something felt wrong.
In the 5 seconds since command had given the order, Petrov had moved deeper into the classroom, and his behavior had changed. Instead of the agitated gesturing of a man making demands, he was now standing very still, looking directly at the window where Sarah was positioned. "Command, I think our position may be compromised," she reported quietly.
Target behavior suggests he knows about Overwatch.
Before command could respond, Sarah saw Petrov raise his rifle toward the children. There was no more time for analysis or second guessing. He was about to execute hostages.
Sarah took the shot.
The bullet traveled through the Prague morning air, passed through the classroom window, and struck Petrov in the upper chest. The impact spun him away from the children and into the back wall of the classroom, where he collapsed without firing his weapon. "Target down," Sarah reported, already scanning for secondary threats.
Hostages appear uninjured.
What followed was a carefully choreographed assault by Czech special forces who had been positioned throughout the building.
Within minutes, the remaining terrorists were neutralized and the hostages were being evacuated to safety.
But, as Sarah watched children being reunited with their parents in the schoolyard below, she noticed something that would haunt her for months. One little girl, maybe 7 years old, kept looking up at the building where the shooting had occurred.
Even from her position on the rooftop, Sarah could see the confusion and trauma in the child's eyes. "Outstanding work, Guardian Angel," command reported. "All hostages secured, all terrorists neutralized. Mission complete."
Sarah began breaking down her rifle, but her attention remained on the little girl below. Someone had just saved her life, but she would never understand who or why. She would only remember the violence, the fear, and the moment when a man fell down and didn't get up. Later that day, Sarah sat in her hotel room in Prague, cleaning her rifle and reflecting on the morning's events. By any tactical measure, the operation had been a complete success. No hostages killed, all terrorists eliminated, minimal property damage. Her superiors were already discussing commendations and recognition. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about that little girl's face. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her grandmother's number.
"Hello, Grandma."
"Sarah, dear, I saw the news about what happened in Prague."
"Are you safe?"
Sarah closed her eyes, grateful for the familiar voice.
"I'm safe.
We were able to help those children and teachers."
"I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Your grandfather would be proud too."
"But, are you taking care of yourself?" It was the same question her grandmother had been asking for years, but tonight it carried extra weight.
Sarah realized she wasn't sure how to answer anymore. "I'm trying, Grandma.
But sometimes I wonder if this work changes you in ways you don't notice until it's too late." Her grandmother was quiet for a moment.
"Tell me what you're thinking about."
Sarah described the little girl, the look of confusion and trauma that would probably stay with the child for years. She talked about the weight of making life and death decisions, about the difficulty of reconciling the necessity of violence with the desire to protect innocence. "You know," her grandmother said softly, "your grandfather went through something similar after the war. He came home different, not broken, but changed. He used to have nightmares about the people he saved and the people he couldn't save."
"How did he deal with it?"
"He found ways to give back. He volunteered at the local school, taught gun safety classes, mentored young people who needed guidance. He realized that healing came from using his experiences to help others, not from trying to forget what had happened." After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly in her hotel room, thinking about her grandmother's words. She had spent the last 7 years focused entirely on the mission, eliminating threats, protecting innocence, serving her country. But she had never considered what came after the mission was complete.
The next morning brought new orders.
Sarah was being reassigned again, this time to a training position at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group.
Her job would be teaching advanced sniper techniques to the next generation of special operations personnel.
It's a prestigious assignment, explained Colonel Stevens during her briefing. Command recognizes your tactical expertise and leadership potential. You'll be responsible for developing new training protocols and mentoring junior snipers.
Sarah felt mixed emotions about the assignment.
Part of her was ready for a change, for the opportunity to pass on what she had learned to others. But another part worried about losing the edge that came from operational deployment.
Sir, can I ask why I'm being pulled from active operations? Stevens looked at her with understanding eyes. Because you've completed 47 successful missions without a single operational failure.
Because you've saved hundreds of lives and eliminated dozens of high-value targets. And because even the best operators need time to process what they've experienced. Sarah realized that her superiors had been watching her more carefully than she had known. They had seen signs that she might not have recognized in herself, the gradual accumulation of stress and responsibility that came with her level of operational success.
When do I start?
Next month. But first, you're getting 30 days of mandatory leave. No missions, no briefings, no operational responsibilities.
Command wants you to go home and remember what normal life looks like.
3 weeks later, Sarah found herself back in Iowa for the first time in over 2 years. The family farm looked exactly the same, but everything felt different through her changed perspective. The woods where her grandfather had taught her to hunt seemed smaller now, the targets less challenging, the stakes infinitely lower. Her grandmother met her at the door with a warm embrace and immediately began preparing her favorite meal.
The familiar rituals of home provided a comfort that Sarah hadn't realized she desperately needed.
You look tired, dear, her grandmother said as they sat down to eat. Not physically tired, but tired in your soul.
Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak.
For years, she had maintained perfect emotional control in the most stressful situations imaginable. But, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by photographs and memories of happier times, that control finally began to crack. I've killed 43 people, Grandma, she said quietly. All of them were bad people who were threatening innocent lives, but they're still dead because of decisions I made.
And I'm not sure how to live with that anymore.
Her grandmother reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in her own.
Your grandfather killed people too, sweetheart. Different war, different circumstances, but the weight was the same. Do you know what he told me when he came home?
Sarah shook her head. He said that taking a life, even when necessary, changes you forever. But what matters is what you do with that change. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it to become someone who protects others even more effectively. They talked late into the night about purpose, responsibility, and the price of protecting others. Her grandmother shared stories about her grandfather's post-war struggles and eventual healing. She talked about the importance of finding balance between service and self-care, between duty and humanity. The next day, Sarah visited her grandfather's grave for the first time since joining the Navy. She stood quietly beside the headstone, thinking about the legacy he had left and the path she had chosen to follow. I understand now, she said softly to the stone marker. It's not about being the perfect soldier or the perfect sniper. It's about being a complete person who happens to have exceptional skills.
Thank you for teaching me that. During the remaining week of her leave, Sarah volunteered at the local elementary school, helping with their after-school program.
Working with children reminded her of why her job mattered, but also showed her the innocence and joy that existed beyond the world of tactical operations.
One afternoon, a 7-year-old girl named Emma approached her during art time.
Miss Sarah, my daddy says you're a soldier.
Do you fight bad guys?
Sarah considered her answer carefully.
Sometimes I help protect good people from bad people.
But, mostly, I try to make sure kids like you can go to school and play with your friends without being scared. Emma smiled and returned to her drawing. Later, Sarah saw that the little girl had drawn a picture of herself playing on a playground, surrounded by other children and watched over by a figure labeled Guardian Angel. Sarah realized that this was how she wanted to be remembered, not as a perfect sniper or an elite warrior, but as someone who had dedicated her life to protecting the innocent joy of children like Emma. When she returned to active duty, Sarah brought a new perspective to her teaching responsibilities. Her students were technically proficient, but she focused on something more important: the mental and emotional preparation needed to make life and death decisions while maintaining their humanity. Precision isn't just about hitting your target, she told her first class of advanced sniper candidates.
It's about understanding the broader impact of every action you take.
Your job isn't to be a killer, it's to be a protector who occasionally has to take life to save life. One student, a young Marine named Rodriguez, raised his hand.
How do you deal with the responsibility? How do you sleep at night knowing you've killed people? Sarah appreciated the honest question.
You sleep at night by remembering the people who got to go home to their families because of your actions. You deal with the responsibility by ensuring that every shot you take is absolutely necessary and completely justified. And you maintain your humanity by never forgetting that the person in your scope is a human being, even if they're threatening innocent lives. Over the following months, Sarah developed new training protocols that emphasized not just technical skills, but emotional resilience and ethical decision-making. Her students learned to shoot with exceptional accuracy, but, more importantly, they learned when not to shoot. The nickname Guardian Angel had followed her from the field to the training facility. Her students used it respectfully, understanding that it represented not just her tactical abilities, but her unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life. One evening, as Sarah was reviewing training schedules in her office, she received an unexpected phone call from Colonel Stevens.
"Sarah, I have an unusual request.
There's a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires someone with your specific skill set and experience.
Would you be willing to consider a temporary return to operational status?"
Sarah felt her pulse quicken. After months of teaching, part of her missed the intensity and immediate impact of field operations.
"What's the situation, sir?" "A terrorist cell has kidnapped the daughter of a key intelligence asset. The child is 8 years old. Intelligence suggests they're planning to execute her in 72 hours unless certain prisoners are released.
We need someone who can make an impossible shot to save her life." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about Emma's drawing that still hung on her office wall. Thinking about that little girl in Prague whose trauma had started her journey toward understanding balance and purpose.
"When do I leave?"
"Your transport departs in 6 hours.
"Sarah, this one matters.
Not just tactically, but personally. The asset's daughter reminds everyone of why we do this work." As Sarah packed her operational gear for the first time in months, she reflected on how much her perspective had changed. She was still the same precise sniper, still capable of making impossible shots under extreme pressure.
But now she understood that her true mission wasn't just eliminating threats, it was preserving the innocence and joy that made life worth protecting.
The enemy had called her a guardian angel in mockery, thinking it diminished her lethality.
They were wrong.
Understanding her role as a protector of innocence had made her more dangerous than ever, because now every shot was fired not just with technical precision, but with absolute moral clarity. Sarah Chen was ready to prove once again that sometimes guardian angels wore combat uniforms and carried sniper rifles. And sometimes, that was exactly what the world needed.